Hey everybody. A while back I did a video on how to use solder seals and how awesome they are. And I've had a lot of people asking how I built the RGB Ws2811 floodlights using the boards from RobG that he sells in his Tindy store. So I'm going to make this little video on how to throw these things together. Really easy. Get the floodlight housings from eBay. I got 4 of these for about $45. All we're going to use out of it is the housing and the reflector. We've got the boards from RobG. This is a 20 watt RGB WS2811 pixel. Ginormous LED there. Got a couple of PG7 glands and a couple of pigtails. So what we're going to do in a nutshell is we're going to rip this apart, we're going to gut it, take everything out of it, set it off to the side, solder our connectors onto here, drill some holes, run our pigtails through, put these glands in, seal it up all nice and tight, plug it in, and hope we don't let any smoke out. So I'm going to go ahead and start the disassembly process of the floodlight and show you guys how all that's going to look. Okay, so now we got our floodlight out. First thing we're going to do is undo the 4 screws, 1 in each corner. And put that aside for later. Carefully pop your glass loose. There's a silicone seal underneath. This glass is fairly rough cut on the edges, very sharp, so be careful. When I took this one off, there was actually some glass chips that were stuck in the silicone gasket that fell out, so be very careful with those glass chips. Here's the silicone gasket. Set that one aside. There was only 2 screws holding this reflector in place. I'm going to go to local Ace Hardware and see if I can find some that are the right size. You can see they're fairly small little machine screws. Put those aside. This reflector is only slightly thinner than tin foil. Bends very, very easily. You can see how bendy that is. Bendy a word? And then there's our LED chip. We'll zoom in on that a little bit. So that is a 30 watt, 24 volt LED chip, solid white. This is our RobG chip. You can see the size of the chip is identical. So that allows that to screw back into the exact same spot where the original LED chip was. You see the power lines exit out on each side through a hole in the case. Let's zip this back out. And into this separate housing here on the back. This is where the power supply is for this. We're going to open this up, remove the power supply, remove this entire housing. Might be a handy little power supply to keep around. It's only hot glued in place. This is from another one that I've already removed. It's listed as an LED driver. So it's 90 to 220 volt input and gives 24 volt output. Being that small, I'm not sure how clean that power would be, so I wouldn't try to reuse that for anything critical. Now we're going to go ahead and strip this out and open up the power supply container on the back. Okay, so now we've got the power enclosure on the back disassembled. This is the cover with a little silicone seal, holds a little LED driver. This is the back plate that's affixed here with 4 screws onto the back of the housing. And a really crummy attempt at a seal between that power enclosure and the housing. These are not going to be very effective. I wouldn't suspect that these enclosures would have lasted a long time out in the elements. So we're going to seal these up with some red RTV from both sides. Fill that hole up nicely. Keep anything from getting on the inside. Already removed the 4 screws. Make sure you use the right size screwdriver. This one was in very tight. screwdriver was a little sloppy and it almost rounded it out. We got that out of there and we'll be able to reuse that. So I'm going to use a small flat screwdriver. I'm going to try to not damage these as I remove them, because you never know when these might come in handy to have around in the junk box. There we go. They've got a nice little bit of heatsink goo underneath there. We're obviously not going to reuse old heatsink goo. I bought some good Arctic Silver 5 at Micro Center. So we're going to clean up the housing. I'm going to solder up our new RobG flood module and get that installed. Try and get this to zoom in clearly here. I'm not sure how well it'll work. Not very well. I don't know if you can read the stenciling that Rob's put on here, but we've got our voltage positive, we've got our ground, we've got data in, and we've got data out. So to daisy chain these, you're going to need to connect both of your in and out to your ground and voltage positive. What I did was I put a 18 gauge on each of these coming off, and then joined the pigtails V positive and ground to that 18 gauge, and I'll get some more detail of that. And then obviously the data in, data out went to its respective pigtail that we put through the case on the PG7 glands. We're also going to drill 2 holes. I drilled them here. I drilled one here and one here, big enough for that PG7 gland. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Okay, so here we have one almost finally assembled. You can see I've put in the PG7 glands, run my pigtails through. I've used 16 gauge wire on the positive and the ground, tied them together, going through each pigtail. Have my data in and I have my data out. So there's the wires tied together. Used a little bit heavier. This is 18 gauge, so I use 16 gauge here. And then your data in, data out. Now we're ready to wire everything up to a test controller. See what happens. You can see here's the holes that I filled in with RTV. Made sure they were well covered on the back side as well. This is where that little power enclosure was that we didn't need. So if all goes well, I should have 20 watts of RGB light. Okay, and there we have 3 that have been completed, running test pattern off one of Dan Culp's F8 boards. Gonna let them run for a few hours, make sure there's no issues, and then I'll build the next set. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to post, and I'll be glad to answer anything I can. Thanks.